So we're talking about building societies, and there are experts in the room right here, so please do shout out if there's anything that we're saying that doesn't quite stay on point. But to Ralph's point, looking at financial services has been a real change in the range of customer experiences that we can have across those products, yet we still see quite a lot of difference across the market in terms of how we're serviced. So I'd like to explore some of those themes and some of the opportunities also that sit there. So just to kind of look at building societies in the general outlook, there's quite a lot going on in that space at the moment. And there's a real kind of changing narrative, and there's a real kind of shift in the market. There's lots of activity. If we look at some of the headlines that have been coming out over the last couple of months, really big deals in the market. These are really major, big names, and really showing a shift of maybe some of us have not actually interacted with building societies. We've traditionally been with the larger banks, but we're starting to see a lot of this kind of consolidation in the market and changing in terms of ownership. Again, another acquisition, but again, seeing how we're looking at Co-op, which we may know as a retail brand, and their banking arm. So we're starting to see all of those different crossovers across different areas of the market. And I think there's some really, really positive news here. Some parts of the market are really on a downturn, budgets are hard, it's hard to get investment. In others, there are some profits out there. What will people be able to do with those, and how might that change how we can interact with those products ourselves as users? And again, I think what we need to think about when we're thinking about the building society angle here is this is a member-led type of organisation. There is a very different value proposition here, and maybe very potentially different ways to look at where the focus might be. So if we think about it, not just building societies, many financial organisations within the UK are at this inflection point. Ralph mentioned challenger banks. Having worked in that industry myself, it's amazing. You are digital native, everything's on one data source. It's very easy to release things very quickly. That's much harder challenge if you have legacy platforms, legacy processes, and very fragmented and in-store experiences that you need to service. So this pressure, as people have this rising demand, and the really high expectations we have through any of our interactions through big tech, really start to influence where that spend might go and what people might need to change. So those demands, just to kind of illustrate, if we look at the banking industry, 93% of people are looking for more personalised products. That's great. We also need to think about the balance here. When does knowing too much about you as a customer start to become a little bit creepy if people are recommending things or pushing things at you? So using people's data respectfully and understanding what they need it for is also part of that challenge. As we see the digital challenges, we're really seeing a lot of change in the market. So you look at Revolut recently receiving its banking license with some restrictions. That's a big game changer. I think before, whilst they had a great product, they always had that challenge that they didn't have that backing of the regulatory framework. That is something that's changing. Also, some of these challenges are really now starting to turn a profit. So, there's a real change in the assets that they have at their disposal to be able to grow. And then if we think about existing digital products, there is a perception that many financial apps and websites for the more legacy brands could do a lot more and are lacking in the functionality that people are really wanting. So let's look at it from the other angle. What are those unique advantages that organisations such as building societies have? And what is that path to being a modern mutual, and how might that develop? There is something to be said for the building society model as being a really customer-oriented industry. If you contrast that to the typical perception of a bank, which is to try and make money off you, there's a very different concept when you're thinking about building societies. And if we start to fold in people wanting purpose-driven businesses that they want to interact with, this is a real point of differentiation. If we think about sustainability in terms of corporate social responsibility, that's also another angle to look at. So, on the modernisation front, there is a real imperative to be able to offer these hybrid channels. And again, when we look at building societies, there are many channels and people often still expect that branch experience. So to Richard's point earlier, it's very difficult trying to service across multiple branches, to have a wonderful app that somebody can do their transaction with any time in their hand and have that web experience at the same time. And how are we developing those products to really appeal to the next gen members as well? And what does that profile of membership look like over time? So I do want to spend a bit of time in this talk just really thinking about customer journeys and how we think about that. So I mentioned data. If we can get data in a joined-up fashion across an organisation, there's so many things you can do with that. You can understand processes, you can gain efficiencies, but you can really start to see, how do our customers interact with what we do? Where might there be gaps? Where are those other things that we can try and build products around to service for them? And do we understand what our customers want? So I'll talk a bit more about that later. And if we talk about building societies, other financial institutions, there is this whole concept of lifetime value. There are very differing needs that you're going to have through your journey in life. And I'll explore in a bit more detail that these are not necessarily linear. They're not the same for everybody. There may be different circumstances that change that. That leads to very complicated ways to make sure that you're servicing and giving the right products at the right time. So what could some of the differentiators be for institutions such as building societies? The hybrid piece could be something to really look at here. We've seen a lot of news in the markets, in fact, very recently in the last couple of weeks, around branches closing across banks across the country. This really worries people. People wonder about access to cash. Some members of society are not so digital, so this is really important. And I think this is for building societies, having a branch-led model could be something to really build out. There is also this concept of community hubs. So as we've seen, news around bank closures, for example, are there different ways to repurpose these spaces? Can you offer people completely different services that aren't just about their bank account, their savings, lending, etc.? And could they become areas where people exchange ideas, do their work, get a coffee? We're starting to see these things pop up. In fact, I think we've got one of these popping up round the corner from our office in London. So it'd be really interesting to see how people interact with that. And then I think on the digital front, I mentioned the likes of Revolut, Monzo. Everyone expects to be able to have an accessible app on their phone. I want to do my banking when I'm at home, when I'm on the train. This needs to be, really seamless and frictionless, and that is not an easy thing to achieve. I think also that loyalty piece, where I may have one product to do certain types of transactions, and then I can favour others, is something that I think customers are demanding more and more. So, without scaring anyone with the detail on this slide, how do we start to think about putting the customers at the centre of what we're trying to do? I mentioned kind of a lifetime journey here, and even if you try and think about those stages in life where you're accumulating your wealth, so you're saving up your money, you're building your money, you're earning, through to the spending, and then the kind of later stages in life when you're looking for those investments and pensions, etc., even that in itself is really hard to delineate, because depending on those different activities in your life, you're going to kind of merge across these different things. Similarly, there's no one linear path through this diagram. there could be very different triggers as you go through regarding employment, regarding savings you want to do around education, your life circumstances around your family. And I think being able to understand the complexities of those journeys for your customers takes some effort, but can really kind of pay off, because then you can start to understand those linkages, the different routes through. To Richard's point, is there any reuse in any of this? Are there very similar kind of types of triggers and transactions that kind of are coming off the back of this? So if you think about those triggers, it's not just about looking at your customers, this demographic at this age, doing this. There could be other things that are happening in their lives. You can help customers think through their planned life events. So I have my child who's born, I open a savings account, I want to save for them to go to university. These are things that we can help people to plan for, but we need to let them know that these are available. We need to give them different plans and ways to interact with these. And maybe thinking about planning for life events further in the future. How do we reach out to younger people, thinking about longer term investments and what they might be doing in later life stages as well? And then we've got to balance that with those unexpected changes. So what might happen? You might lose your job. There might be a macro event, such as a recession that impacts your savings or your income. How do you not only understand what your customers are going through to start thinking about, do there need to be waivers on fees they have to pay or deferring payments, through to actually thinking about those events that are changing as we go through life. So if we think about buying a first home, if we compare that to 20 years ago, the profile of people who are first-time buyers could be very, very different. They could still be living at home in their family home. That kind of opens up not just thinking about when to offer these to people, but different ways to structure. So if we think about different ways of sharing income plans to be able to be viable for a mortgage, for example, and there could be certain products that certain people in the room are very familiar with around shared income programs. So either parents being able to sort of put forward and be liable for some of the income profile for a mortgage, or even people who aren't related clubbing together and to be able to afford to get those types of plans. These are products that are evolving because of the different circumstances around that. So just to kind of map on, once we know those sort of different interactions, those different pathways, we can plot on the different kind of products and services that might be useful and available to people at that time. That can be really helpful for an organisation to say, do we actually have some gaps? Because between this path to here, there's actually nothing to service there. Or does it kind of show us where our competitors are? And, you know, we want to be in there. So I think adapting those services to the trends and behaviours, but also being conscious of those macro trends and keeping that picture up to date by talking to users and, you know, keeping an eye on the competition is really, really key. So I think I mentioned earlier about developing that lifetime view. If we can help people to offer products that really do what they need to do, are really easy to use, and also are offered in a way that is not pushing to people, but is actually relevant to them, to what they need, you can start to develop that loyalty. And if we think about the kind of shift in demographics across the UK at the minute, really appealing to that younger generation, where the wealth transfer piece is going to happen over time, is really, really important. So I think that piece around educating and engaging, rather than, I've said pushing quite a few times, but you know that kind of, there is nudging and there's push notifications and things like that. I think that sensitivity about how your users want this information is really, really important. And then finally, being purpose-driven and member-led is a real opportunity here. There are different expectations from people about the kind of organisations that they want to invest in, spend money with, and save with. So I think these are all factors that are really, really important to take forward. So I won't overlabour this because we had a really good talk from Specsavers before. once we've got our picture here, I'm not underestimating the challenge there is to actually knitting all this together. So, as mentioned before, having your North Star and your strategy, thinking through those possibilities and iterating those are really important. To deliver a solution, it can be a very complex project. To knit together different products, different brands, and then thinking through those layers of the engineering capabilities, the data, the different platforms to support that. And we really mustn't forget supporting that change. Technology is the enabler here, but how are teams working together? Do they have the right skills? Are they aware of what each other's doing? And do the business processes still stand up? In a regulated environment such as building societies, your policies, your regulations all have to be adhered to as well. So this is a complex thing to do. So setting up from the beginning to say how to manage that program of change, as was demonstrated earlier with Specsavers, is really, really important. Right, I'm kind of rushing through because I want to get to the next piece, which is about a little bit of interaction on the tables. So how much time have I got? 8 minutes. So I've got 3 questions. Now, if you can get out your phones, there is a Slido code here. And we just wanted to test the temperature in the room around some of these themes. So, first question is, what do we think the biggest pressures are on the building society sector currently? And don't worry if you don't work in that industry, just your experience of having used those types of services will be great. So, wow, way ahead on 49%, we have legacy tech constraints. So I think probably not news to anyone in the room. That complex diagram of knotted together interdependencies seems to be a really, really, really big one there. Digital challenges seems pretty high on people's minds as well. So I guess being able to compete with that fast-moving, fast-changing, adapting user experience as well. Great. Now, on to the next question. Okay. This question's kind of looking at it from the other angle. What do we think the biggest opportunities could be for building societies? Everyone looks very serious on their phones. So personalisation is really coming out quite a strong contender here. But loyalty now is the top one. Really interesting. So this loyalty to that model, to have people that want to remain with you as a company as they develop through their life, that's really, really important. And I think a bit of a differentiator in the market there as well. All right, last question. So this one's a bit more open-ended and free text, so we'll see what comes up. What will the modern mutual look like? What are the potential in the future? What will be important? It's a bit of a theme here around personalisation, being sensitive, safety. Purpose is quite strong. Scary. Oh, I'd really like to find out later who thought it was scary. Multi-channel is really, really key. Digital but human. That's a nice summary, I think, of thinking that through. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for inputting. This is really, really interesting. Accessible and simple. Don't know if we could maybe nab digital but human as a strapline that we could use.